You may notice that I am a middle-aged, maybe not a grumpy uncle, but I'm a middle-aged man, and that means that a lot of my friends are middle-aged men. I can think of three in particular. They're my roommates from Carleton University back in the Paleozoic era. We've been friends for 35 years. Kevin and Jeff live in Edmonton, and Mike lives in in Toronto. And one of the things that makes this particular family work is because, like a lot of families, we have unwritten rules, right? And two of the unwritten rules are you can laugh at anything. It doesn't matter how dark or how sad. Laughing is always okay. And the second rule is when it comes to showing love for one another, we show, we don't tell. We're like music. And that worked for the first 35 years or so. But this spring, Jeff was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so we've been thinking a lot about rethinking the words. And we don't know how long he's got left, so we know that we have to stick with what we know, and what we know is two things. One, the four of us are going to spend as much time together as we can. I'm sorry, I thought I was not going to be able to cry until the end, but I'm going to cry all the way through. So just bear with me, okay? And so we'll go to Edmonton and we'll spend time together. And the second thing is that we're going to honor Jeff's request. One of Jeff's requests was, would you just please be the same idiots you've always been? And so we laugh, even when it's dark. But it's not always dark, you know? As you maybe get the vibe from me, my friends are all the same. We're bookish and we're nerdy. And so in the group chat, and it's the 21st century, so there's always a group chat, the humor sometimes gets a little niche, you know, a little. So Mike, at one point, was, maybe it was about a week before we were all headed to Edmonton, and he shared a story about a book that he was reading. It was called Parental Guidance, and it was about the attempts by the religious right to censor music in the United States. Well, you'd think, right? But what he shared was a photograph, and it was a photograph of a protest in front of a jazz show in Alabama in 1958. And the picture showed exactly, if you would imagine what a protest in front of an African-American musical performance in Alabama in 1958 would look like, you would not be wrong. Like, just imagine it yourself. This is a bunch of thick-necked, crew-cutted dudes holding signs over their heads with some of the darkest shit you've ever seen on them. And they were all really dark, except for one. And that one was trying to be dark, but it said, "Bebop causes communism." And we laughed. And Kevin said, "That really would look good on a t-shirt." And we laughed some more. And so the conversation, don't look at my t-shirt, you're going to spoil the story. The conversation continued, and so, and when it ended, I went online that night before the trip, and I thought I would go into Vistaprint or something, and I was going to get a t-shirt, and it was going to say, "Bebop causes communism," and I'd done up this art, and it was the pianist Joe Castro, and he'd been done up to look like Fidel Castro, and he had a beard and a cigar. And then I looked, and the cart told me it was a minimum 3 weeks delivery, and I wouldn't be able to get it in time before I went to Edmonton. So I went to Edmonton. I thought, I'll just tell them the story when I get there. I get into the restaurant with Jeff and Kevin. Mike is arriving later that night, and Jeff arrives late, as usual, and he's got a grin on his face, and it's as big as, well, It's as big as the paper bag that he's holding. And before the drinks arrive, Jeff reaches into the paper bag. And he's got a t-shirt. And for those of you at the back who can't read the t-shirt, this says Bebop promotes communism. Jeff got get the verb wrong. But there's the first 4 bars of Salt Peanuts by Dizzy Gillespie on the t-shirt. And we laughed. In the darkness, we laughed. And we couldn't wait to show Mike this thing that Jeff had done. And Mike got back from Toronto late that night. And so we were all staying at Kevin's, Mike and I, and the next morning I was in the living room hanging out with Mike, and he said, you know, I got a gift for you guys. And I said, it wasn't a t-shirt, was it? And so the next, a few minutes later when we were all gathered up and we're going to meet Jeff for breakfast, and Jeff arrives late, as usual. And Mike and Kevin and I stand up. And for those of you at the back, Mike's t-shirt reads, Bebop causes communism. And we laughed. In the darkness, we laughed. Because as things are going on, as they progress, we can't help but think to question the rules. We're pushing back. We hug each other now instead of shaking hands. And when I leave the airport in Edmonton, I make sure that each one of the guys knows that I love them. And I tell them that I love them. Because sometimes love can be music. It can go unsaid. But sometimes it's better if it's a story. Thanks very much.